Hundreds of thousands of years ago, our prehistoric ancestors were nomadic hunters and gatherers. Private property didn't exist, and neither did a marriage recognized by the courts. But when the hoe and plow were invented and nomads focused more on agriculture, a society that had been unchanged for millennia began to transform. Nomads became sedentary farmers, and the concept of settling down with a singular partner was the new norm. With this rise in marriage came the concept of a nuclear family, a family group made up of two parents and their children. Today, this standard is once again shifting as the era of technology impacts human behavior. What was once out of the question in recent history is now not so rare. Take divorce, for example.
I remember even when I was growing up in the 70s, divorce was still seen as something bad and unfortunate, and there were fears that it was going to hurt the children. Now it's really commonplace. It's not that people embrace it, but we see that as normal. So normal changes, and it's going to change more quickly now because the technologies are changing more rapidly.
That's Debora Spar, a professor at Harvard Business School and author of Work, Mate, Marry, Love: How Machines Shape Our Human Destiny. In her book, she examines how technology has affected countless different areas of our lives, from our daily routines to how we find love or even how we start a family.
So once upon a time, the only way you could produce a child was through sex. Sex reportedly still works. Most people would choose to have children that way, but increasingly people are producing their children through technology, through things like IVF, artificial insemination, and technologies that are getting more and more refined every day. And crucially, and this connects to both marry and love as well, I'm arguing that there used to be what economists would call a sort of bundled package, that you only mated with the person you were married to, and one could hope that you were in love with them as well. So it was a package deal. Now the parts of those package are being separated. So people will have sex with people with whom they're not married, and they will have children with people with whom they may not be having sex. So we're increasingly unbundling what used to be that package deal.
As a result, the idea of what it means to be a family has changed drastically in recent years. For centuries, the typical family unit was a heteronormative one of a husband, wife, and kids. Today, a variety of family arrangements are now considered normal, from single parent to same-sex marriages and everything in between.
We're also seeing more recently the emergence of online dating. And we don't know yet exactly how that's going to play out, but we're already seeing signs. About a third of all marriages today in the United States were generated by matches made online. I think that's a perfectly good thing, but it's a different thing. And we're seeing people for sure finding partners online in a much more casual way. You know, in the old days, people fell in love first, then thought about marriage and sex. Now we're seeing that chronology change very often, where people use online services to have sex, and then if they're interested, then they will pursue a relationship. But the order of things is quite different than when you and I were growing up.
Spar doesn't advocate for disrupting the institution of marriage. She herself has been happily married for over 30 years. However, Spar says that we need to be aware of the impact that the internet and these apps can have on people, because this technology is here to stay.
The history of technology suggests pretty strongly that once we create something, we develop it, we fall in love with it, we let it evolve. There's very few instances where any society has said, no thanks, we don't want this new toy, we don't want this new tool. Once we create things, we use them. And it's sort of the argument in this book is figuring out, or a lot of what I'm trying to argue is, we need to figure out, or at least make reasonable guesses about where these technologies are going. And then we need to figure out what we want them to do and how can we take the good parts of them without sort of getting carried away by all the potentially less savory aspects.
These negative consequences of technology extend past relationships. It's also present in procreation. CRISPR-Cas9 is one such technology. It allows people to rewrite human DNA, or in other words, change inheritable characteristics. For many years, experts studying medical ethics have been afraid people will use this innovation to create designer babies that will have certain attributes, whether it be more pleasing physical features or enhanced intelligence. But what would that do to the future of the human race? And CRISPR is just one of today's technologies that humans need to be cautious with. There are numerous other advancements on the horizon that are unconventional and quite futuristic.
Everybody wants to talk about falling in love with robots. And I do think it will happen. And of course, it will be a massive transformation in human relationships. But what I'm seeing here is not so much, throwing out your husband for a robotic version, but more what we're already starting to see. We're seeing what are called assistive robots being used to provide emotional support for elderly people, for sick people, for people with dementia. And these are pretty basic things. One of my favorites is a robotic seal. It doesn't do very much, but it's almost like having a puppy. It brings emotional joy to people who don't have other loved ones around them to support them. There's increasing amount of work on using robotic teachers to interact with autistic children. It's not a romantic relationship, obviously, but it's an emotional relationship. And I think those are the kind of robots we'll start falling in love with.
Sound too far-fetched? Think about it. We're already in love with our smartphones. So maybe the concept of robotic love is not too far off the mark.
I always ask folks to do kind of the thought exercise. How many people listening or went to bed with their phone next to them in bed? It's usually a pretty surprisingly high number. And I'm not saying people are romantically involved with their phones, but I do think we're starting to become more and more attached to our phones, attached to our devices. And I do think remember, we're in the sort of Model T stages of these technologies. This is the road we're going to keep walking along.
One thing is clear. What sets us apart from other intelligent life forms is our ability to adapt and to do so quickly. Smartphones are relatively new in history, yet billions of people now hold one in the palm of their hands. Spar says the pandemic has also forced millions to quickly change their lifestyles, and for the most part, people have improvised and adapted relatively well.
In 6 months of COVID, we've all gotten kind of used to having even our most intimate personal relationships, births and deaths and funerals and romance conducted on our laptops. And I don't think we're going to move away from that even when, God willing, this pandemic is over and we can get back to normal. We're still going to have shifted a lot of our personal relationships to machines. We are crashing into the future here. I think a lot of the things that we're seeing right now are things that people have been predicting for a while, but everything's been accelerated because literally in the space of 1 week, all of education online, all of church and other religious services online. And again, yes, we will go back, but in the meantime, we figured out how to do some of this stuff pretty well. And there's clearly bad parts, but there's also some good parts.
There's no doubt that machines help to make our lives more manageable. Social distancing, working, and going to school remotely are all made possible because of our technology. Perhaps our survival depends on our ability and even willingness to evolve as rapidly as our machines. Debora Spar's book, Work, Mate, Marry, Love: How Machines Shape Our Human Destiny, is available now. You can learn more about her and all of our guests by visiting our website at viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written and produced by Polly Hansen. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
As many as 89% of hospitalized COVID-19 patients are at risk of a complication called cytokine storm, a leading cause of COVID death. But there's good news. Hospitals across the U.S. are enrolling patients in a trial evaluating lenzilumab, an investigational treatment designed specifically to stop this storm, even with only 1 day of treatment. Dr. Cameron Durant, CEO of Humanigen, the company developing lenzilumab.
Having a therapeutic that can significantly reduce the time to recovery from COVID-19 and send patients home earlier could dramatically impact the arc of this pandemic.
Participating in the study means access to a potential treatment option in addition to standard of care therapies. Trial participant Mark Baranski shares his experience.
I don't know if I received lenzilumab or not, but I viewed the trial as doing everything I could for my recovery while contributing to the fight against COVID-19. I certainly encourage others to do the same.
To learn more and find this trial near you, visit StopStorm.com. That's StopStorm.com.
That's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows. And find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints. Coming up next week.
People were really interested in cooking thematically. So people would throw yellow dinners and orange dinners and pink dinners.
We explore the interesting trends and themes of early American cuisine in the 1920s and 30s. Then,
a waitress will bring this big slab of cream pie to the table, and just like you look to the table next to you and you look over and say, I want a piece of that, you know.
You're gonna need to grab a piece of pie after this story. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.